This video is sponsored by Skillshare, the online community with thousands of classes for creative and curious people. Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my in-depth review of the Canon RF 50mm 1.8 STM, a low-cost lens that's set to become a bestseller in the EOS R mirrorless system. Announced in November 2020 and costing around $200 or pounds, it becomes the successor to the EF 50mm 1.8 STM launched just over 5 years earlier. Now this video is all about these budget lenses, so if you're interested in the much fancier RF 50 1.2, check out my full review of it at cameralabs.com. But at over 10 times the price, it's a very different proposition. So let's get back to those budget lenses. Canon's 50mm 1.8 lenses have always been enormously popular thanks to their flexibility and chance to explore shallow depth of field effects at a low price. And while the new RF 50mm 1.8 may cost roughly double that of the most recent EF version, it's still the cheapest model in the RF catalogue to date, while also claiming a number of improvements. To find out how it measures up against the older EF version, I compared them side by side for sharpness and rendering, for landscapes, portraits, close-ups and much more, so keep watching to find out if the new RF lens truly deserves the honour of becoming the next nifty thrifty 50. Okay, so here's the older EF 50mm 1.8 STM on the left, joined by the new RF 50mm 1.8 STM on the right, and at first glance they're similarly sized and styled. Measuring 69 by 41mm and weighing 160 grams, the RF model is essentially the same size and weight as the previous EF version, but remember, in order to use the older lens on a new mirrorless body, you will need to add an adapter, which makes it noticeably longer and a bit heavier too. Now, as budget lenses, neither model is weather sealed, and lens hoods are of course optional extras. Remember, this is Canon we're talking about, but at least both have metal lens mounts. The RF 50mm 1.8 STM employs 6 elements in 5 groups, has 7 aperture blades and a closest focusing distance of 30cm. That's a little closer than the 35cm of the older EF version, but otherwise so far so similar. Canon has however shrunk the filter size from 49mm on the EF lens to 43mm on the RF version. Both lenses employ Canon's STM focusing motors with internal barrels that extend and retract during use. They're also quite audible, as you can hear. For comparison, here's the EF version, again with that distinctive motorized buzz while focusing. To compare their focusing speed for stills, I mounted each lens on an EOS R5 body and recorded their views. You're looking at the RF 50mm 1.8 here at f1.8, and while it's not exactly the quickest of focusers out there, it does get the job done pretty accurately. For comparison, here's the view with the older EF 50mm 1.8 STM, again at f1.8. I'd say the speed is pretty much the same, and despite occasional hesitations, the overall focusing performance and experience looks and feels pretty similar. Now for focusing during video, where you can faintly hear the motors when using the built-in camera microphones, so if you need audio on location, try to use an external mic. And again for comparison, here's the older EF version, again filming on the EOS R5. In terms of controls, the RF 50mm 1.8 STM has a single ring towards the end of the barrel that turns more smoothly than the sometimes scratchy version on the older EF version. Like other budget RF lenses, this ring performs double duty with a switch setting it to either manual focus or adjusting a custom control that's set in the menus. If you want to manually focus this RF lens though, you can't just set the switch to focus and start turning the ring. You also need to enter the camera AF menus and switch the focus mode from AF to MF. Now when you return to the live view, you'll be greeted by focusing assistance, including a distance scale that's unique to the RF lenses, but having to enter the menus to switch between auto and manual focus can become a bit annoying. I also couldn't find a way to customize a button on the body to directly toggle between AF and MF without first entering a menu. Now if you don't manually focus that much, it's not a big deal, but if you do, it's worth knowing. Compare it to older models like the EF 50mm 1.8 STM here, where a simple flick of the switch on the barrel sets it to manual focus, after which you can turn the ring to adjust the distance. Now EF lenses may lack the digital distance scale on the EOS R bodies, but you can still employ peaking, magnified and other types of assistance. Okay, now for some image quality comparisons, starting with rendering and bokeh blobs at close range. I used an EOS R5 for all the tests in this review. You're looking at the RF 50mm 1.8 here gradually closing its aperture from f1.8 to f11, where the initial oval blob shapes quickly become heptagons, revealing the 7-sided shape of the aperture blade system. Now here's the RF 50 1.8 on the left and the EF 50mm 1.8 STM on the right, both from the same distance and set to f1.8, where you can see they share essentially identical rendering styles. So at their maximum apertures you'll see blobs rendered as oval shapes, particularly towards the edges and corners, while the blobs themselves mostly manage to avoid onion ring textures and harsh outlines. You may however notice the image from the EF version is a fraction tighter than the RF model, indicating either a slightly longer actual focal length or perhaps some cropping after geometric correction. Now it's not a problem, but it's worth mentioning as you'll see in my other comparisons coming up. But first, here's a neat trick for movie shooters who on some bodies can set the aperture increments in the menus to very fine 1/8 stop intervals. I'm gradually closing the aperture while filming here to show the smooth transitions that are possible with this setting, and using auto ISO to balance the exposure. Okay, now to portrait, starting with the RF 50mm 1.8 at 1.8, and now switching to the EF 50mm 1.8 STM again at f1.8, where you can see that minor difference in magnification again. Place them side by side and I'd say the newer RF 50mm 1.8 on the left looks a little sharper, especially for fine detail around my eyes and beard, which are a little crisper and better defined than the EF version on the right. Meanwhile, the background blurring style looks pretty similar. If you prefer slightly broader depth of field, here they both are again, but now with their apertures close to f2.8. Again, I'd say while the background rendering is similar, the details on the RF version on the left remain a little bit crisper than the EF lens on the right. Both lenses are ideally suited for filming pieces to camera, with Canon's face and eye detection doing a great job at tracking and refocusing on a moving subject. I filmed this on the EOS R5 with both lenses set to their maximum f1.8 apertures. Playing them side by side shows the camera can successfully drive either lens for this kind of task, and while the newer RF version is arguably a fraction more confident at times, I would be perfectly happy using Face Detect AF to present a piece to camera with the older EF model too. Now for a more distant landscape scene, here with Brighton Pier angled so that details go right into the far corners where lenses struggle the most. Don't worry, I wasn't drunk. Like all my images in this review, everything was taken with an EOS R5 body, and you're looking at JPEGs out of camera with the default settings. Let's start with the RF 50mm 1.8 STM wide open at f1.8, and taking a close look in the middle of the frame shows a high level of resolved detail, even from the demanding high-res R5 sensor. Stopping down the lens has no significant impact on the quality in the middle, so you can be confident of good results in the central area from the get-go. Returning to the f1.8 image and moving into the extreme corners reveals softness as you might expect from a lower cost lens. There's a fuzziness and overall lack of sharp detail. As you close the aperture though, the corners steadily improve, enjoying a visible boost in sharpness by f4, and arguably match the sharpness of the middle between f5.6 and f8. So if you want sharp details across the frame right into the far corners, I'd recommend closing the aperture to f5.6 to f8. Okay, now back to the RF lens wide open at f1.8. Now before comparing the performance against the EF lens, I wanted to check one other part of the frame, roughly midway between the center and the corner. Now during my briefing with Canon, I was told this area was now improved in sharpness over the older EF lens, and taking a close look certainly shows it to be as sharp as the middle of the frame. Likewise, if you move to the opposite side, you'll see the RF 50 1.8 continues to deliver sharp results in this area when wide open. The big question then is how the RF lens compares to its EF predecessor. Is it optically any better? Let's see. Okay, so first let's take a look in the middle of the frame with the RF on the left and the EF on the right, both at their maximum apertures, and I'd say both delivering roughly the same detail and sharpness. Neither improves in the middle as you close down the aperture, so I'm calling it a draw at this point. Next, let's move out to the extreme corner, again with the RF on the left and the EF on the right, starting at f1.8 where both lenses look pretty soft. As you gradually close both lenses down, there's visible improvements, and as seen before, a big improvement by f4 and arguably reaching the maximum quality between f5.6 and f8. So again, so far so similar. But wait, if you look closely at the midpoint between the center and the corner, you'll notice the RF lens on the left is indeed noticeably sharper than the EF lens on the right when both are set wide open. In fact, as you close down the aperture, you'll see the RF lens on the left is pretty much delivering its maximum resolution in this area from the get-go, whereas the older EF lens has to be closed down to at least f5.6 to match it here. To further cement Canon's claims, here's the view halfway between the middle and the opposite corner, with both lenses again at f1.8, where the improvement on the new RF version is clearly visible. Now coincidentally, this greater area of sharpness on the RF lens roughly corresponds to the APS-C imaging circle. So if Canon were to make an EOS R camera with an APS-C crop sensor, or if you're shooting in a 1.6x crop mode on one of the full frame bodies, you'll enjoy sharp results from this lens across the entire frame, even wide open at f1.8. This represents a welcome upgrade over the older EF model, which quickly softens beyond the middle, at least when it's wide open at f1.8. The RF 50mm 1.8 is also a flexible lens for video shooters, delivering a roughly standard field of view and also capable of attractive shallow depth of field effects. Now this is a tripod shot, but in the following clips I've filmed with the lens handheld on an EOS R5 body, where Canon claims up to 7 stops of compensation from IBIS alone. Not bad for IBIS alone, right? Now before wrapping up with my final verdict on whether you should buy this lens, I want to give a big thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of high quality classes for creatives, including photography, graphic design, music, writing and video editing. Now I really enjoy the work and production of YouTuber Ali Abdal, so I loved his Skillshare series on video editing with Final Cut Pro X, which is what I use to edit these videos. In particular, learning how he creates his trademark hand-drawn titles, captions and diagrams using an iPad Pro and a cunning blend trick during the edit. As someone who's often working on lots of different things at once, I appreciate how the classes are broken down into easy to digest chapters, allowing you to jump to the information you need and easily repeat it. Skillshare members have unlimited access to ad-free classes, projects and feedback from a large community for less than $10 per month. But don't just take my word for it. The first 1,000 subscribers to this channel who click the link in the description below will get a free trial of premium membership, so whatever your level you can explore and expand your creative skills. Okay, now for my final verdict, during which I'll show you a slideshow of images I took with the RF 50mm 1.8 on an EOS R5 body, and all of them are JPEGs straight out of camera. As always, you can access the original files if you want them via my corresponding review at cameralabs.com. The Canon RF 50mm 1.8 STM is a low-cost standard lens for the EOS R mirrorless system which, like the EF versions before it, provides an affordable entry into the world of prime lenses, low-light photography and shallow depth of field effects. It may cost roughly double that of the EF 50mm 1.8 STM, but at around $200 or pounds, it still becomes by far the cheapest native lens in the RF system to date. And that makes it tempting for anyone looking for a second lens to complement, say, an existing kit zoom. It's smaller than the EF version when you take a mirrorless adapter into account, and while the overall style and rendering is similar, the newer RF version is noticeably sharper across more of the frame when wide open, and it also delivered sharper details on my portrait tests. That said, it is not to the same standard of the RF 35 1.8 and RF 85mm f2 in my own tests. Both of those lenses are sharper across more of the frame while crucially delivering far better quality at close range, and they enjoy the benefit of optical stabilization too. But while the RF 35 and 85 are at the cheaper end of the catalogue, they're still up to 3 times more expensive than the RF 50 1.8. That's why it and its predecessors are known as the thrifty 50s. And like the EF catalogue, I reckon there's justification for a mid-range 51.4 in the RF mount, but it still won't detract from the proposition of the cheapest 1.8 version. Now, more demanding photographers will undoubtedly prefer the quality and close-ups of the 35 and 85, and those who already own an EF adapter and don't mind its size will find the older EF 50 1.8 unbeatable value. But if you're looking for a compact, fun and flexible prime lens with great potential for blurring effects, you will not find a cheaper option in the native lineup. Right, that's it for this review. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and thanks to you for watching to the end. You're clearly a viewer with great taste, so be sure you subscribe to ensure you don't miss out on my other videos. And as always, if I've saved you any money or perhaps helped with a purchase, you can make my day with a tip for a coffee or by treating yourself to my in-camera photography book. There's links to everything you need in the description below. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.